I was sitting on my front porch in rural Montana, watching the sunset paint the sky orange and purple, when I saw her marching across the gravel driveway toward my property like she owned the whole damn valley. I recognized her immediately because everyone in our small development knew Brenda Whitmore, the self-appointed guardian of our homeowners association, and the most insufferable busybody within 100 miles of Great Falls. My name is Xavier Thompson, and I have been running Thompson Propane Supply for the last 15 years, ever since my father passed and left me the family business. Our little subdivision called Pine Ridge Estates sat about 40 miles northwest of Great Falls, Montana, right where the plains start giving way to the Rocky Mountain foothills. It was beautiful country, wide open spaces, clean air, and normally peaceful neighbors. Normally being the key word there, because Brenda had moved in about 8 months ago and immediately appointed herself the HOA president, despite there being only 12 houses in our entire development, and most of us not giving a damn about having an HOA in the first place. She stopped about 10 feet from my porch, hands on her hips, her blonde hair pulled back so tight it looked painful, wearing a pantsuit that seemed wildly out of place for rural Montana. "Xavier Thompson, we need to talk about those tanks." I took a slow sip of my coffee, not bothering to stand up. "Evening to you too, Brenda. What tanks would those be? Do not play games with me." Her voice had that sharp edge that suggested she thought she was dealing with a misbehaving child rather than a 42-year-old man who had lived here his entire life. "Those industrial propane tanks on the side of your property are in direct violation of our HOA bylaws, Section 4, Paragraph B, which clearly states that no industrial equipment or commercial materials can be stored on residential properties." I set my coffee cup down on the porch railing and finally stood up, walking to the edge of the steps. "Brenda, those tanks have been there for 15 years. They were there before this HOA nonsense even started. Hell, they were there before you even knew Montana existed." Her face flushed red, which I was learning was her default setting when someone dared to question her authority. The date of installation is irrelevant. The bylaws are the bylaws, and they apply to everyone equally. Those tanks are an eyesore and a safety hazard, and they need to be removed immediately. "They are not going anywhere," I said, keeping my voice level despite the irritation building in my chest. "Those tanks are part of my business. Thompson Propane Supply services this entire area. Without those tanks, I cannot do my job." "Then perhaps you should not be running a commercial business out of a residential property," she snapped back. "I have already contacted several board members and we are in agreement. You have 2 weeks to remove them or we will be forced to take legal action." I laughed. I could not help it. "Board members? Brenda, there is no board. You appointed yourself president and the rest of us did not even vote on it." "I was elected through proper channels," she insisted, though we both knew that was complete nonsense. She had called a meeting that only 3 people attended, including herself, and declared herself president. Most of the neighborhood had not even known about the meeting until after it happened. "Look, I do not have time for this," I said. "I've got deliveries to make tomorrow and I need to get my routes planned. Have a good evening." I turned to head back into my house, but her voice stopped me. "If you do not comply, I will have no choice but to contact the authorities." I turned back around slowly. "The authorities? You mean the sheriff?" "Brenda, Sheriff Morrison buys his propane from me. So does the fire department, the hospital in Great Falls, and about 300 other customers in this area. You really think they are going to side with you over some made-up HOA violation?" Her expression told me she had not considered that angle, but she recovered quickly. Rules are rules, Xavier. I will be documenting this conversation, and you will be hearing from our attorney. She turned on her heel and marched back toward her oversized SUV that looked like it had never seen a dirt road before last year. I watched her drive away, shaking my head. The whole thing would have been funny if it were not so damn annoying. My phone rang before I even got back inside. It was my best friend and neighbor, Marcus Riley, who lived 3 houses down. "Did I just see the dragon lady leaving your place?" "Yeah, she's got a problem with my propane tanks now." Marcus laughed. "Of course she does. Last month it was Tom's chicken coop. The month before that it was Sarah's vegetable garden, because apparently growing your own food is not aesthetically pleasing enough for Her Majesty." "What did you tell her?" "Same thing I would tell anyone who tried to interfere with my business. She can go pound sand." "Good man." "Hey, we are having a barbecue this Saturday if you want to come by. Bring some of that good beer you keep hidden." "I will be there," I said, ending the call and finally heading inside. I did not think much more about Brenda's threats over the next few days. I had a business to run, and spring was always my busiest season. Farmers needed propane for their equipment, families were firing up their grills and heaters, and I had 3 new construction sites that needed tank installations. My days started at 5 in the morning and usually did not end until well after dark. Thompson Propane was not just a business to me. It was my legacy, my connection to my father and grandfather who had started the company back in 1967. We had built our reputation on reliability, fair prices, and actually giving a damn about our customers. In rural Montana, that meant a lot. When someone's heat went out in the middle of January, they did not want to wait 3 days for some corporate delivery service. They called me, and I showed up, usually within a few hours. The tanks Brenda was so upset about were not just sitting there for decoration. They were part of my bulk storage system, necessary for keeping enough supply on hand to service my customers without having to make constant trips to the main depot in Great Falls. I had all the proper permits, all the safety inspections up to date, and all the insurance required by state and federal law. Everything was completely legitimate and legal. On Tuesday morning, exactly 1 week after Brenda's visit, I was in my workshop organizing delivery schedules when I heard vehicles pulling up my driveway. Not just one vehicle, but several. I walked outside to find 2 sheriff's deputies, a fire inspector, and Brenda standing beside her SUV with her arms crossed and a satisfied expression on her face. Deputy James Carter, whom I had known since high school, looked uncomfortable as hell. "Hey, Xav. Sorry about this, but we got a complaint about potential safety violations with your propane storage tanks. We have got to do an inspection." I looked past him to Brenda, who was practically glowing with self-righteousness. "Let me guess who filed the complaint." "We are just doing our job," Deputy Carter said quietly. "Fire Inspector Douglas needs to check out the tanks, make sure everything is up to code." "Everything is up to code," I said, frustration creeping into my voice. "I just had my annual inspection 2 months ago. I have got all the paperwork inside." Fire Inspector Douglas, a stern-looking man in his 50s, stepped forward. "I would still like to take a look if you do not mind. Should not take long if everything is in order." I did not have much choice, so I nodded and led them around to the side of my property where the 3 large propane tanks sat on their concrete pads, surrounded by the required safety fencing and proper clearance zones. I went inside and grabbed my file of permits, certificates, and inspection reports while they examined the setup. Brenda followed along like she was supervising the whole operation, making little comments under her breath about industrial blight and property values. I ignored her as best I could, handing the stack of paperwork to Inspector Douglas. He spent about 20 minutes going through everything, checking serial numbers, examining the safety valves, measuring clearances, and reviewing my documentation. Finally, he closed his folder and turned to face all of us. "Everything here is completely in order," he announced. "All permits are current, all safety requirements are met and exceeded in some cases. These tanks are properly maintained and pose no safety risk whatsoever." He looked directly at Brenda. "Madam, I do not know what you thought you would find here, but this is one of the better propane storage setups I have seen. Mr. Thompson clearly takes safety seriously." Brenda's face went through several shades of red. "But the HOA bylaws clearly state—" "I do not care about HOA bylaws," Inspector Douglas cut her off. "My concern is safety and legal compliance, and this installation meets every requirement. Good day." He nodded to me and walked back to his truck. The deputies looked relieved to have an excuse to leave. Deputy Carter paused before getting in his patrol car. "Sorry about that, Xav. You know how it is." "Yeah, I know," I said, watching them drive away. Brenda remained standing in my driveway, her expression a mix of anger and disbelief. "This is not over. The HOA has the right to enforce its bylaws regardless of what the county says." "Brenda," I said, my patience finally wearing thin. "Let me explain something to you. Those bylaws you keep waving around. They were written by a developer 10 years ago for a subdivision that was supposed to have 50 houses. We have got 12. Half the people here did not even know those bylaws existed until you showed up. And more importantly, my business has a grandfather clause because it existed before this development was even planned. You have got no legal ground to stand on." "We will see what a judge has to say about that," she shot back. "You know what? Go ahead. Waste your money on a lawyer. But before you do, you might want to think about where you are getting your propane from." She blinked, not understanding. "What are you talking about? Your house? You heat with propane, do you not? And that fancy gas fireplace in your living room and your tankless water heater, all propane." Her expression shifted slightly as comprehension started to dawn. "And who do you think supplies propane in this area, Brenda? Who do you think fills that tank behind your house every month?" She opened her mouth, closed it, then opened it again. "Are you threatening to cut off my service?" "I am not threatening anything. I am just pointing out an interesting fact. I am the only propane supplier within 50 miles. The next closest company is based out of Missoula, and they do not service this far east. So when you start throwing around legal threats and trying to shut down my business, you might want to consider the consequences." I watched the realization spread across her face. She had not thought about that. She had been so focused on wielding her imaginary HOA power that she had not considered the practical reality of living in rural Montana, where the nearest town was 20 miles away, and services were limited. "You cannot refuse service to someone just because of a personal dispute," she said, but her voice had lost some of its certainty. "That is illegal." "You are right. It would be illegal to refuse service based on discrimination," I agreed. "But business decisions based on payment history, customer behavior, or operational priorities are perfectly legal. And a customer who is actively trying to shut down my business and cost me my livelihood might find themselves pretty low on my priority list when it comes to deliveries, especially during high-demand periods. Just something to think about." I turned and walked back toward my house, leaving her standing in the driveway. I heard her SUV start up a minute later and the sound of tires on gravel as she left. Marcus called again that evening. "Heard Brenda called the cops on you. That true?" "Fire inspector too," I said. "Waste of everyone's time. Everything checked out fine, obviously." She is losing her mind over there. My wife ran into her at the store in Chodao yesterday, and apparently, Brenda spent 20 minutes complaining about how nobody in this neighborhood respects proper standards. As if we are all supposed to pretend we live in some fancy suburb instead of rural Montana. She is going to be a problem, I said. I can feel it. I had no idea how right I was. 2 days later, I woke up to find a certified letter in my mailbox. It was from a law firm in Great Falls, representing the Pine Ridge Estates Homeowners Association. The letter informed me that I was in violation of multiple HOA covenants and bylaws, and I had 14 days to remove all commercial equipment from my property or face legal action, including daily fines of $500 and a lawsuit to force compliance. I sat at my kitchen table reading the letter 3 times, feeling my blood pressure rise with each pass. This was insane. Brenda had actually hired a lawyer and was serious about pursuing this. I called my own attorney, Gerald Hayes, who had handled my business affairs for years. After I read him the letter, there was a long silence on the other end of the line. "This is the stupidest thing I have seen in 20 years of practice," Gerald finally said. "Your business predates the HOA. You have got commercial property rights that were established before the covenants were even written. And the development never completed its planned construction, which means the HOA itself is on questionable legal ground. I will draft a response, but Xavier, I have got to ask, does this woman understand she is picking a fight she cannot win?" I tried to explain it to her, I said. "She does not seem to care." "Well, she will care when she starts getting my billable hours. I will shut this down fast." Do not worry about it. But I was worried. Not about the legal case itself. I was confident we would win that, but about the principle of the thing. I had lived in Montana my whole life, had built my business through hard work and honest dealing, and now some outsider who had been here less than a year was trying to tell me how to live on my own property. The next few days were tense. Gerald sent his response to Brenda's lawyer, essentially telling them they had no case and any attempt to pursue legal action would result in a countersuit for harassment and legal fees. I thought that would be the end of it. I was wrong. On Friday evening, I got a call from one of my customers, Helen Bradshaw, an elderly widow who lived about 15 miles outside of Chodao. "Xavier, dear, I hate to bother you, but my propane is running low, and I am worried about running out over the weekend. Is there any chance you could come by tomorrow? Of course, Mrs. Bradshaw. I will have you on my morning route. Should be there by 9. "Oh, thank you. You are such a good boy. Your father would be proud of how you run the business." That call made me smile. It reminded me why I loved this work, why it mattered. People like Mrs. Bradshaw depended on me. This was not just about money or property rights. It was about community, about taking care of people. Saturday morning, I loaded up my delivery truck and headed out. Mrs. Bradshaw was my first stop. Then I had 5 more deliveries scheduled before noon. It was a beautiful spring morning, the kind that made you remember why people chose to live in Montana despite the harsh winters and isolation. I was filling Mrs. Bradshaw's tank, chatting with her about her garden plans for the summer when my phone rang. It was Marcus, and he sounded agitated. "Xav, you need to get back here. Brenda is at your place with some kind of work crew." What kind of work crew? I do not know, man." "There is a truck with some equipment and they are on your property. I tried to ask what they were doing, but they told me to mind my own business." I felt my stomach drop. "Call the sheriff. I am on my way." I apologized to Mrs. Bradshaw, promised to come back and finish our conversation another time, and jumped in my truck. The 15-minute drive back to Pine Ridge Estates felt like an hour. My mind was racing through possibilities, none of them good. When I pulled into my driveway, I could not believe what I was seeing. There was indeed a work truck parked beside my propane tanks, and two men were examining the connections. Brenda stood nearby, supervising the whole operation, and she had the audacity to look satisfied when she saw me arrive. I was out of my truck before it fully stopped, striding across my property toward them. "What the hell do you think you are doing?" One of the workers, a younger guy with a clipboard, looked startled. "Are you the property owner?" "Damn right I am." "Who are you, and what are you doing with my equipment?" Brenda stepped forward. "Since you refuse to comply with the HOA order to remove these tanks, we are having them relocated. The cost will be added to your HOA dues." I stared at her in disbelief. "You cannot just come onto my property and touch my equipment. That is trespassing, that is vandalism, and depending on what you told these guys, it might be fraud too." The worker looked between us nervously. "Madam, you said you had authorization from the property owner." "I have authorization from the HOA, which has authority over all properties in this development," Brenda said smoothly. "That is a lie," I said directly to the workers. "I never authorized anything. You are on private property without permission, and you need to leave right now." The two workers looked at each other. The older one, who seemed to be in charge, held up his hands. "Look, we do not want any trouble. We were hired to do a job, but if there is a dispute about authorization, we are not getting involved. Come on, Dave." They started packing up their equipment, and Brenda's face went purple. "You cannot just leave. We have a contract." "Lady, we are not getting in the middle of whatever this is," the older worker said. "You want to sort out your property disputes, fine, but we are not touching anything without clear authorization from the actual owner." They climbed into their truck and drove off, leaving Brenda and me facing each other across my driveway. "You are making a huge mistake," she said, her voice shaking with rage. "I am trying to maintain property values and standards in this community, and you are acting like some kind of hillbilly who thinks rules do not apply to him." That word, hillbilly, coming out of her mouth with such contempt, it was like something snapped inside me. I had been trying to be reasonable, trying to explain things calmly, but I was done. "Let me tell you something, Brenda," I said, my voice low and hard. "I was born in Montana. My father was born here. My grandfather homesteaded land not 20 miles from where we are standing. My family helped build this community when it was nothing but grass and rocks. We have worked this land, served our neighbors, and earned our place here through generations of blood, sweat, and honest labor. You rolled in here 8 months ago from God knows where, bought a house with money from whatever corporate job you fled, and immediately decided you knew better than everyone else how things should be done. You have no roots here. You have no history here. You have no right to tell me or anyone else in this community how to live." "I have every right," she shot back. "I am an owner in this development, which means I have a say in how it is managed. Just because you have been here longer does not mean you get to ignore the rules." "The rules were meant for a completely different kind of development," I said. "This was supposed to be a suburban subdivision with tiny lots and houses packed together. That did not happen. We have got acreage here. We have got space. People moved here because they wanted room to breathe, not because they wanted some HOA dictator telling them what color they can paint their fence. If you do not like the HOA rules, you should not have bought property in an HOA community," she said. "I did not buy property in an HOA community. I built my house here in 2008, before the HOA was even established. The developer added the HOA requirement to later sales, but it does not apply to the original landowners. My lawyer has already confirmed that." I could see this information bothered her, probably because her own lawyer had not mentioned it. That does not give you the right to run a commercial business in a residential zone. It is zoned for agricultural and commercial use, I said. Always has been. You can check with the county planning office if you do not believe me. A sheriff's vehicle pulled up before she could respond. Deputy Carter got out, looking even more uncomfortable than he had during the tank inspection. Got a call about a possible trespassing situation. Yeah, I said. Miss Whitmore here hired contractors to come onto my property without permission and attempt to relocate my propane tanks. Deputy Carter turned to Brenda. Is that true, madam? The HOA has the authority to enforce its bylaws, she insisted. Those tanks are in violation. But did Mr. Thompson give you permission to send workers onto his property? I do not need his permission. The HOA, madam, Deputy Carter interrupted. HOA authority does not override property rights. If the property owner did not give permission for people to come onto his land and touch his equipment, that is trespassing at minimum, possibly attempted theft or vandalism depending on what they were planning to do. This is ridiculous, Brenda sputtered. I am trying to maintain community standards. Then you need to do it through proper legal channels, Deputy Carter said. That means court orders, not self-help remedies. I am going to need you to leave Mr. Thompson's property now. I am not on his property. I am standing on the common area driveway. Deputy Carter looked around at the clearly private driveway leading to my house. Madam, please do not make this more difficult than it needs to be. She glared at both of us, then turned and stalked back to her SUV. Before getting in, she pointed at me. You are going to regret this. I promise you that. She drove off, and Deputy Carter let out a long sigh. Xav, I do not know what is going on between you two, but this is getting out of hand. She has called the station 4 times in the last week with various complaints about you. The sheriff is getting tired of it. I am not doing anything wrong, I said. She is the one who keeps escalating things. I believe you, he said, but you might want to think about getting a restraining order or something. Document everything she does, every interaction. If this keeps going, you are going to need a record of her behavior. He was right. I knew he was right, but the idea of having to get a restraining order against a neighbor was depressing as hell. This was not how things were supposed to work in small communities. After Deputy Carter left, I stood in my driveway for a long time, just staring at my propane tanks and trying to figure out how things had gotten so crazy. 6 months ago, I had been living my life, running my business and getting along fine with everyone. Now, I was in the middle of some bizarre war with a woman who seemed determined to destroy me over tanks that had been sitting in the same spot for 15 years. Marcus and his wife Amy came over that evening with a casserole and beer. We figured you could use some company, Amy said, giving me a hug. The whole neighborhood is talking about what happened. Most people think Brenda has lost her mind. Most people, I asked. Marcus made a face. Well, she has got the Hendersons on her side. They have always been uptight about property appearance stuff. And that new couple who moved in last month, the ones with the fancy cars, they seem to like her brand of suburban fascism. But everyone else thinks she is nuts. We sat on my porch, eating Amy's excellent chicken casserole and drinking beer while they filled me in on the latest neighborhood gossip. Apparently, Brenda had been calling special HOA meetings that nobody attended, sending out violation notices for things like grass being half an inch too long or mailboxes that were not regulation black, and generally making herself the most hated person in Pine Ridge Estates. She called code enforcement on Tom's chicken coop, Amy said, claimed it was a health hazard. The inspector came out, looked at it, and said it was cleaner than most people's kitchens. Tom was furious. She tried to fine us for having a trampoline in our backyard, Marcus added. Said it was not in keeping with the aesthetic of the community. I told her the only aesthetic I cared about was keeping my kids happy and active. Why is she like this? I wondered aloud. What makes someone move to rural Montana and immediately try to turn it into a suburban nightmare? Amy, who was a school counselor and generally good at understanding people, thought about it for a moment. I think she is scared. She is used to having rules and structure and predictable suburban life. Out here, things are different. People are more independent, more self-reliant. That probably feels chaotic and threatening to her. So she is trying to impose order the only way she knows how, through rules and regulations and HOA bylaws. That does not give her the right to make everyone else miserable, Marcus said. No, it does not, Amy agreed. But understanding why someone acts a certain way can help you figure out how to deal with them. I appreciated their support, but I was not sure understanding Brenda's motivations was going to help much. She had made it clear she was not going to stop until she got her way, and I was equally determined not to let her destroy my business. The following week was quiet, suspiciously so. No threatening letters, no surprise inspections, no work crews showing up uninvited. I should have known it was just the calm before the storm. On Thursday afternoon, I was in my office catching up on paperwork when I got a call from Gary Peterson, who owned the hardware store in Chotao. Hey, Xav, I hate to tell you this, but I just had a visit from some woman claiming to represent a new propane company in the area. She said they were going to be offering lower prices and better service than you. Wanted to know if I would be interested in switching providers. My stomach clenched. What did you tell her? I told her I had been doing business with you for 15 years and had no intention of changing, but she was pretty aggressive about it. Left her card and said I should think about it. I thought you should know someone is trying to poach your customers. Thanks for the heads up, Gary. I appreciate the loyalty. Hey, you have always done right by me. I do not forget that kind of thing. Over the next 2 days, I got 7 more calls from customers telling me similar stories. Someone was actively going around to my customer base, trying to convince them to switch providers. The problem was, there was no other propane company in this area. The nearest competitor was based out of Missoula, and had told me years ago they had no interest in servicing the Great Falls region because the distances were not worth it. So, who was this mystery company, and why were they targeting my customers? I did some digging, and found out the woman making the rounds was named Patricia Chambers, and she was claiming to represent a company called High Plains Propane Services. A little more research revealed that High Plains Propane Services had been registered as an LLC in Montana exactly 2 weeks ago. The registered agent was Brenda Whitmore. I sat back in my chair, stunned. Brenda had actually formed a competing company specifically to drive me out of business, but how was she planning to service customers? She did not have trucks, equipment, supply contracts, or any of the infrastructure needed to run a propane delivery service. It would take hundreds of thousands of dollars to set up a legitimate operation. I called my lawyer. Gerald was silent for a long moment after I explained what I had discovered. Xavier, this might actually be good news for us. How is someone trying to destroy my business good news? Because she is crossing lines that even HOA authority would not protect her from. If she is making false representations to your customers, claiming she has a legitimate competing business when she does not, that is fraud. That is tortious interference with business relationships. We can sue her personally, not just fight an HOA dispute. I do not want to sue anyone, I said wearily. I just want to run my business and live my life. I understand, but we may need to take action to protect you. Let me do some more research and put together a strategy. In the meantime, Document every instance of her contacting your customers. Get statements if they are willing to provide them. After I hung up with Gerald, I sat in my office staring out the window at the mountains in the distance. This was escalating in ways I had never imagined. What had started as a petty HOA dispute was turning into something much bigger and potentially much uglier. That weekend, I drove around to several of my longtime customers, not for deliveries, but just to talk. I wanted to make sure they understood what was happening and reassure them that Thompson Propane was not going anywhere. Every single one of them was loyal and supportive. Many were angry on my behalf. That woman came to my house, Mrs. Bradshaw told me, her hands shaking with indignation. She was very rude and pushy, insisted I would save money with her company. I told her I had been your customer for 20 years and I was not changing now. She actually tried to tell me you were going out of business soon and I should switch before I got stuck without service. Can you imagine the nerve? Did she say anything else? I asked. She mentioned something about legal troubles you were having, implied you might lose your business license. I told her that was nonsense and asked her to leave. This was worse than I thought. Brenda was not just trying to compete, she was actively spreading lies about my business. I thanked Mrs. Bradshaw and drove home, my mind churning with anger and frustration. Monday morning, I woke up to find my email inbox flooded with messages. Customers were forwarding me a mass email they had received from High Plains Propane Services. The email claimed that Thompson Propane was ceasing operations due to safety violations and legal issues, and that High Plains was positioned to take over service for all existing customers at reduced rates. I immediately sent out my own mass email to my customer list, explaining that the claims were completely false, that Thompson Propane was operating normally and would continue to do so, and that High Plains Propane was not actually a legitimate operating company. I attached copies of my current licenses and safety certifications just to be thorough. Then I forwarded everything to Gerald with a simple message. Enough is enough. Do whatever you need to do. Gerald filed a lawsuit that afternoon. We were suing Brenda Whitmore personally and High Plains Propane Services for defamation, fraud, tortious interference with business relationships, and several other claims I did not fully understand but trusted Gerald knew what he was doing. We also filed for an emergency restraining order to stop her from contacting my customers. The process server found Brenda at home that evening and handed her the papers. I was not there to see it, but Marcus was driving by and witnessed the whole thing. He said she stood in her doorway reading the lawsuit, her face getting redder and redder, and then she slammed the door so hard he heard it from the street. I thought maybe, finally, this would end it. I thought being sued might make her realize she had gone too far and back off. I should have known better. Wednesday morning, I woke up to find all 4 tires on my delivery truck slashed. My workshop door had been pried open, and several pieces of equipment were damaged. Someone had spray-painted hillbilly trash across the side of my propane tanks. I called the sheriff immediately. This time, Deputy Carter came with Sheriff Morrison himself. The sheriff was a gruff man in his 60s who did not tolerate nonsense. He walked around my property, examining the damage, taking photos, and asking questions. "You think it was the HOA lady?" he asked. "I do not know for certain, but the timing is awfully suspicious. She got served with a lawsuit yesterday, and this happens last night. Any cameras?" I shook my head. "Never needed them before. This is usually a safe area." "Well, you need them now," Sheriff Morrison said. "I am going to have a deputy drive by more frequently, but you should invest in a security system. And Xavier, I want you to be careful. When people get desperate, They do stupid things. The vandalism cost me over $3,000 in repairs and lost business while my truck was in the shop. My insurance covered most of it, but that was not really the point. Someone had violated my property, damaged my livelihood, and tried to intimidate me. It made me feel unsafe in my own home for the first time in my life. I had security cameras and motion-activated lights installed that same week. The camera installer, a guy from Great Falls named Randy, told me he had done 3 other installations in Pine Ridge Estates in the last month. "Something going on in your neighborhood?" he asked. "Yeah, something like that," I said. The preliminary hearing for our lawsuit was scheduled for 3 weeks out. Gerald was confident we had a strong case, especially with the documented evidence of Brenda's fraudulent emails and false representations to my customers. The police were investigating the vandalism but had not made any arrests yet. Things were relatively quiet for about a week. Then I got a call from the Montana Propane Gas Association, the industry organization I belonged to. The director, Linda Carmichael, sounded concerned. "Xavier, we received a complaint about your business. Someone claiming to be a customer alleged that you violated safety protocols during a delivery and that your equipment is not properly maintained. We are required to investigate all complaints, so I need to schedule an inspection of your facilities and review your procedures. Linda, my equipment is inspected regularly. You know that. I have got perfect safety record for 15 years. I know, and I am sure this will be resolved quickly. But we have to follow protocol. Can we do this Friday morning?" I agreed, because what choice did I have? But I knew exactly who had filed the complaint. Brenda was using every avenue she could think of to cause me problems. The inspection took 3 hours. Linda and another inspector went through every inch of my operation, reviewed all my maintenance logs, checked my safety equipment, and even watched me do a mock delivery to verify my procedures. When they were done, Linda looked apologetic. "Everything is perfect as I expected." Whoever filed that complaint either has no idea what they are talking about or was deliberately making false allegations. I will file a report clearing you of any violations. "Can you tell me who filed the complaint?" I asked. She hesitated. "It was supposed to be anonymous, but it came from an email address for High Plains Propane Services. That mean anything to you?" "Unfortunately, yes." "Well, making false complaints to industry regulators is serious business. We do not take that lightly. I will be making a note of that in my report as well." After Linda left, I sat in my office feeling defeated. No matter what happened, no matter how many times Brenda's schemes failed or backfired, she just kept coming. She was relentless and I was exhausted. That evening, Marcus came by with a 6-pack. We sat on my porch, not really talking much, just being present. Finally, he said, "You know, half the neighborhood wants to help. Tom said he would take shifts watching your place at night. Sarah offered to organize a legal defense fund." "We have got your back, man." "I appreciate that," I said. "But I do not want this to turn into some kind of neighborhood war. That is exactly the kind of drama we do not need out here. It is not drama when someone is attacking your livelihood and property. That is just looking out for each other, which is what neighbors are supposed to do." He was right, of course. One of the things I had always loved about rural Montana was that sense of community, people taking care of each other. Brenda's actions were not just hurting me. They were violating everything that made this place special. The court hearing finally arrived. Gerald had prepared extensively, and we had a thick file of evidence documenting everything Brenda had done. I wore my best suit, which admittedly was not very impressive since I usually wore work clothes, and we drove to the courthouse in Great Falls. Brenda arrived with her own lawyer, a slick-looking guy in an expensive suit who did not seem like he was from around here. They sat on the opposite side of the courtroom, and Brenda refused to even look at me. The judge was Marion Hofstadter, a no-nonsense woman in her 50s who was known for being fair but strict. She listened to both sides present their arguments, reviewed the evidence, and asked pointed questions. Brenda's lawyer tried to argue that she had every right to start a competing business and that any problems with her marketing were just honest mistakes. Gerald systematically destroyed that argument, pointing out that High Plains Propane had no actual ability to provide service, that Brenda had made materially false statements to my customers, and that her actions were clearly intended to harm my business rather than create legitimate competition. Judge Hofstadter did not look amused. When Brenda's lawyer tried to suggest that I was using my position as the only local supplier to bully his client, the judge actually held up her hand to stop him. "Counselor, Mr. Thompson has been in business for 15 years without a single complaint until your client arrived. Miss Whitmore, on the other hand, formed a company 2 weeks ago and immediately began making false statements to established customers of a competitor. That is not competition. That is tortious interference at best, fraud at worst." She granted our motion for a preliminary injunction, ordering Brenda to cease all contact with my customers, stop operating or promoting High Plains Propane services, and refrain from making any false statements about my business. She also ordered Brenda to pay our legal fees for this hearing, which amounted to about $8,000. Brenda's face when the judge announced the decision was something I would not forget. She looked absolutely shattered, like she could not believe someone in authority had not sided with her. As we filed out of the courtroom, she actually tried to approach me, but her lawyer pulled her back. Outside the courthouse, Gerald was pleased. That went about as well as we could have hoped. The injunction is a big win. If she violates it, she can be held in contempt of court, which means potential jail time. Most people back off at this point. Most people, I said, but Brenda is not most people. I was right to be cautious. 2 days after the hearing, I got a call from the county zoning office. Apparently, someone had filed a formal complaint claiming my business was operating in violation of zoning regulations. Never mind that I had been operating legally for 15 years. Now I had to go through the whole process of proving my business was properly zoned. It took 2 weeks and another $1,000 in legal fees to resolve, but the zoning office ultimately confirmed what I already knew. My property was zoned correctly, and my business was in full compliance. The zoning officer who handled my case seemed annoyed at the whole thing. "Someone is wasting a lot of people's time with these frivolous complaints," he said. The vandalism to my property had not resulted in any arrests, but the investigation was ongoing. My security cameras had not captured anything useful from that incident, which happened before they were installed. But now, I had complete coverage of my property, which turned out to be incredibly fortunate because 3 weeks after the court hearing, my cameras captured Brenda Whitmore sneaking onto my property at 2 in the morning. I was asleep when the motion sensors triggered and my phone started buzzing with alerts. I pulled up the camera app and could not believe what I was seeing. Brenda, dressed in dark clothes, was creeping around the side of my workshop with what looked like a crowbar in her hand. I immediately called 911, then grabbed my shotgun from the safe. I was not planning to confront her, just wanted to be prepared in case things got crazy. I watched through my bedroom window as Brenda tried to pry open my workshop door. She was not very good at breaking and entering. It took her several minutes of struggling before she managed to force the door open, By that time, I could hear sirens in the distance. Brenda must have heard them too, because she dropped the crowbar and started running back toward the road. She did not make it far. 2 sheriff's vehicles came screaming up my driveway, spotlights blazing, and Brenda was caught in the lights like a deer. I went outside as the deputies were handcuffing her. Sheriff Morrison got out of one of the vehicles, took one look at the situation and shook his head. "Miss Whitmore, what the hell were you thinking? He is ruining everything," Brenda said, and I was shocked to hear she was crying. "He will not follow the rules. He will not respect the community standards. Someone has to make him understand." "By breaking into his property in the middle of the night," Sheriff Morrison said. "That is called burglary, madam. That is a felony." They put her in the back of a patrol car and Sheriff Morrison came over to talk to me. "You got footage of this?" "Every second," I said. "High definition, multiple angles. Good, because she is going to need a damn good lawyer now." "Breaking and entering, attempted burglary. Maybe we can add criminal mischief if we can prove she did the earlier vandalism. She is looking at serious charges." I watched the patrol car drive away with Brenda in the back seat. Part of me felt vindicated, but mostly I just felt sad. How had things come to this? How had a dispute over propane tanks escalated to the point where a middle-aged woman was committing felonies in the middle of the night? The next morning, the story was all over the local news. HOA president arrested for attempted burglary was the headline in the Great Falls Tribune. My phone rang constantly with calls from customers, friends, and neighbors. The general consensus was shock mixed with a certain amount of "I told you she was crazy." Brenda made bail later that day, but there was a protection order in place keeping her away from my property. Her husband, who I had barely ever seen, looked exhausted and defeated when he came to pick her up from the jail. I actually felt sorry for him. The criminal case moved forward over the next several weeks. Brenda's lawyer tried to negotiate some kind of plea deal, but the prosecutor was not interested in going easy on her. The attempted burglary combined with evidence suggesting she was also responsible for the earlier vandalism made it a serious case. Gerald continued to pursue our civil lawsuit as well. With the criminal charges pending, we had even more leverage. Brenda's lawyer eventually reached out about settling, which is what we had wanted all along. I did not care about getting money from her. I just wanted her to leave me and my business alone. The settlement was comprehensive. Brenda agreed to dissolve High Plains Propane Services, formally retract all false statements she had made about my business, pay all my legal fees and the cost of repairing the vandalism, and resign from any position of authority in the Pine Ridge Estates HOA. In exchange, we agreed not to pursue additional damages beyond the actual costs I had incurred. The criminal case was resolved separately. Brenda pleaded guilty to attempted burglary and criminal mischief. She got 3 years probation, community service, and was ordered to pay restitution. She was lucky she did not get jail time, though the judge made it clear that if she violated probation or had any further contact with me, she would be facing serious prison time. Through all of this, I managed to keep my business running. My customers stayed loyal, my reputation remained intact, and if anything, the whole ordeal had brought the community closer together. The HOA effectively dissolved after Brenda's resignation. Nobody wanted to continue it, and most people agreed we were better off without it. About 2 months after everything was resolved, I saw a moving truck at Brenda's house. I was not surprised. There was no way she could stay in Pine Ridge Estates after everything that had happened. The embarrassment, the legal troubles, the complete rejection by the community, it was all too much. I did not go over to say goodbye or gloat or anything like that. I just watched from my porch as they loaded furniture and boxes. Her husband looked broken, and I genuinely felt bad for him. He had not done anything wrong. He was just caught up in his wife's obsessive crusade. A few days later, their house went up for sale. Marcus told me they were moving back to wherever they came from, some suburb outside of Chicago. Good riddance, he said, but I could not quite share the sentiment. The whole situation had been ugly and draining, and I was just glad it was over. Life slowly returned to normal over the next few months. My business continued to thrive. The installation of security cameras and upgraded lighting actually made me feel more secure, even though the threat was gone. I hired an additional driver to help with deliveries. Business was good enough to justify the expansion. The property where Brenda had lived was eventually bought by a retired couple from Billings who were looking for a quiet place to enjoy their golden years. They were friendly, low-key, and had absolutely no interest in HOA drama. Perfect neighbors, in other words. One evening, about 6 months after Brenda's arrest, I was sitting on my porch watching the sunset when Mrs. Bradshaw drove by and stopped to chat. She had brought me a homemade pie, which was not unusual. She was always bringing food to people. "I have been thinking about everything that happened," she said as we sat on the porch steps eating pie. "That poor woman was so unhappy. I wonder why she came here if she hated it so much." "I do not think she hated Montana," I said. "I think she was scared of it. All this space, all this independence, people making their own decisions without asking permission. Some people find that freedom terrifying." "Perhaps," Mrs. Bradshaw said. "Still, what a waste of everyone's time and energy. All that fighting over propane tanks that were not hurting anyone." She was right, of course. It had been a ridiculous waste. But it had also taught me something about the importance of standing up for yourself, for your business, for your way of life. Brenda had come in trying to impose her vision of how things should be, and the community had rejected it. Not through violence or cruelty, but through legal channels, mutual support, and simple refusal to accept being bullied. My propane tanks still sat in exactly the same spot they had occupied for 15 years, properly maintained, fully legal, and serving the community as they always had. Every time I looked at them, I thought about the absurdity of everything that had happened because someone objected to their presence. The business continued to grow. Word of mouth brought new customers from farther out. People who had heard about the guy who stood up to the crazy HOA lady and valued that kind of stubborn independence. I became something of a local legend, though I tried not to let it go to my head. One afternoon, about a year after the whole ordeal ended, I got a call from a reporter at a regional business magazine. They wanted to do a story about Thompson Propane Supply, focusing on small businesses serving rural communities. I agreed, figuring it would be good publicity. During the interview, the reporter inevitably asked about the HOA situation. By then, enough time had passed that I could talk about it with some perspective and even a little humor. "The thing about running a business in rural Montana," I told her, "is that you are not just providing a service. You are part of a community ecosystem. People depend on you, and you depend on them. When someone tries to disrupt that ecosystem for their own reasons, the community tends to protect itself." That is what happened with the HOA situation. It was not really about me versus one woman. It was about a whole community rejecting an imposed value system that did not fit our way of life. The article came out a few months later and was really well done. It brought even more business to the point where I had to hire another driver and invest in an additional delivery truck. My father would have been proud to see how the business had grown and evolved, while still maintaining its core mission of serving the community. I eventually started teaching a class at the local community college about small business management in rural areas. A lot of young people were interested in starting their own businesses, but did not know how to navigate the unique challenges of rural commerce. I shared my experiences, including the whole HOA debacle, as a cautionary tale about the importance of knowing your legal rights and standing firm when those rights are challenged. Life in Pine Ridge Estates settled into a comfortable rhythm. Without the HOA, people were free to do what they wanted with their properties within reasonable bounds. Tom expanded his chicken coop. Sarah planted an even bigger vegetable garden. Marcus put up a basketball hoop for his kids. Nobody complained because everyone understood that we had moved out here precisely because we wanted the freedom to live our lives without someone constantly looking over our shoulders. The propane tanks that had started the whole mess became something of a neighborhood landmark. Kids playing in the area would use them as home base for games of tag. During one particularly cold winter, they served as a windbreak for a community gathering where we roasted marshmallows and told stories. They were just part of the landscape, accepted and unremarkable, exactly as they should have been all along. I sometimes wondered what happened to Brenda after she moved away. I hoped she found someplace where she was happier, where her need for order and rules meshed better with the community around her. I bore her no ill will, despite everything she had put me through. She had been out of her element and handled it badly, but I did not think she was inherently evil, just misguided and stubborn. The legal precedent from our case actually helped a few other people in Montana who were dealing with overreaching HOAs. Gerald told me he had gotten calls from lawyers around the state asking about how we had handled things. It turned out our situation was not unique, though it was perhaps more extreme than most. Running Thompson Propane Supply continued to be challenging and rewarding in equal measure. Equipment broke down. Customers had emergencies at inconvenient times. Regulations changed and required adaptation. But those challenges felt meaningful because they were in service of something real, helping people heat their homes and run their businesses in one of the most beautiful and unforgiving places in America. On quiet mornings, I would stand beside those propane tanks with my coffee and look out at the mountains in the distance. The same mountains my grandfather had seen when he first came to Montana. The same sky, the same wind, the same sense of space and possibility. Brenda had tried to fence that in, to regulate it and control it, and she had failed because you cannot fence in Montana. It is too big, too wild, too resistant to being tamed. The community that had rallied around me during the worst of the conflict remained close. We helped each other with projects, looked out for each other's properties when someone was traveling, and generally embodied the kind of neighborliness that makes rural life work. No HOA required, no bylaws needed, just people treating each other with basic decency and respect. I eventually took down the security cameras, not because I thought they were unnecessary, but because I wanted to return to the way things had been before, when I could trust my neighbors and did not feel the need to monitor my property constantly. It felt like reclaiming something that had been taken from me during those difficult months. Years from now, I imagine I will tell my grandkids about the time the HOA lady tried to take down Thompson Propane over some storage tanks. It will be a funny story by then. All the anger and frustration faded into an amusing anecdote about small-town drama. But underneath, the humor will be a serious lesson about standing up for what is right, about not letting bullies push you around even when they have official-sounding titles and legal threats. The propane business that my grandfather started in 1967 was still going strong, adapted to modern times but faithful to its original mission. Those 3 tanks sitting on their concrete pads represented more than just fuel storage. They represented independence, self-sufficiency, and the right to run an honest business without interference from people who think they know better. Every delivery I made, every tank I filled, every customer I helped was a small act of resistance against the idea that everything needs to be regulated, sanitized, and controlled. Montana was built by people who came here precisely because they did not want to live under someone else's rules, and that spirit was still alive in places like Pine Ridge Estates. As I moved into what I supposed was middle age, I felt grateful for the life I had built. The business was solid, my reputation was strong, and I was part of a community that valued the same things I did. The whole ordeal with Brenda, as painful as it had been, had ultimately strengthened rather than weakened my position. I still supplied propane to hundreds of customers across a 50-mile radius, still got up early and worked late, still took pride in showing up when people needed me, whether it was for a routine delivery or an emergency in the middle of a winter storm. The work was hard, but it was mine, and nobody could take that away from me. The sunset painted the sky in shades of orange and gold as I finished my coffee on the porch. Tomorrow would bring another full day of deliveries, maintenance, paperwork, and all the other tasks that came with running a small business. But tonight, I was content to sit and appreciate the peace that had been hard-won and was all the sweeter for it. Those propane tanks, the ones that had caused so much trouble, sat quietly in the fading light. They would be there tomorrow and the day after that, and for many years to come. They were part of my heritage, part of my livelihood, and part of the landscape. And no HOA, no matter how determined, was ever going to change that fundamental truth. Life in rural Montana went on, governed not by bylaws and regulations but by the simpler rules of hard work, mutual respect, and taking care of your own. It was not always easy, but it was real, and it was ours. That was worth fighting for, worth defending, and worth preserving for the next generation. Thompson Propane Supply would continue serving the community. Those 3 tanks would continue storing fuel, and I would continue living my life on my own terms in my own way, in the place I called home.